Hi, everybody! When memory fades, does the heart still remember? Beyond memory is the silent question hanging between Toan and Tu Diem as he looks at her with unfamiliar eyes, while his heart reacts in ways his mind cannot explain. He doesn't know her name, doesn't recall their past, but something about her presence makes his chest ache and his pulse falter. For Tu Diem, every moment beside him is both hope and heartbreak. She wonders if love can exist without memory, if the heart can recognize what the mind has lost. As tears blur her vision, she clings to one fragile belief, that true love leaves an imprint deeper than memory itself. Because even when the mind forgets, the heart may still know the way back. Morning arrived quietly, the way it often does in the countryside, without announcement, without urgency. A thin mist lingered above the narrow road, and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Life moved slowly here, measured not by clocks, but by footsteps and breaths. Toan stood by the roadside, staring at the horizon as if it might offer him an answer he had long forgotten how to ask. He knew his name. He knew how to work, how to survive, how to smile politely at strangers. But everything beyond that felt like a locked room inside his chest. His past was a blur, a dream that slipped away each time he reached for it. Some days this emptiness felt peaceful. Other days it weighed on him like an unspoken loss. That was the day he saw Tu Diem again. She was standing a few steps away, her figure familiar in a way that made his heart hesitate. He could not explain why his breathing changed, why his fingers curled slightly as if trying to hold on to something invisible. He had never met her, at least his mind insisted so, and yet, the moment their eyes met, something deep within him stirred. Tu Diem froze. In that single second, the world seemed to tilt. She had imagined this reunion countless times, sometimes filled with tears, sometimes with laughter, but never like this, never with eyes that looked through her as though she were both everything and nothing at once. Toan's gaze was gentle, curious, and painfully distant. "Excuse me?" he said softly, his voice calm, unfamiliar. "Do we know each other?" The question landed like a quiet thunderclap. Tu Diem felt her heart break, not loudly, but in small, careful pieces. She searched his face for a trace of recognition, a spark, a memory. There was none. Yet strangely, he did not step away. His eyes lingered, as if drawn by a force he could not name. "I'm sorry," he added after a pause, pressing a hand to his temple. "I don't know why, but being near you makes my head hurt, and my heart feels restless." She swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. "It's okay," she whispered, though nothing about it was okay. As Toan turned away, confused by the ache in his chest, one question echoed silently between them. If memory can disappear so completely, why does the heart still remember how to ache? And perhaps, without knowing it, Toan had already taken his first step back toward her. There are days in life when nothing extraordinary happens, yet the heart refuses to stay still. The sun rose as usual, birds sang from the old mango tree, and the village road filled with familiar sounds. But for Toan, the day felt strangely unsettled, as if an invisible thread had wrapped itself around his chest and pulled, gently, persistently. He found himself walking without intention. His steps led him past the small grocery store, across the wooden bridge, and toward a quiet house at the edge of the village. He stopped there, surprised. He did not know why he had come, only that leaving felt harder than staying. The door was half open, and from inside came the soft rhythm of sweeping, slow, careful, almost thoughtful. Tu Diem looked up when she sensed someone standing there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, like a shared breath. Toan felt it again, that subtle tightening in his chest, the same feeling he had experienced the day before. It wasn't pain exactly. It was recognition without a name. "I'm sorry," he said at last, almost shyly. "I don't know why I'm here." Tu Diem's fingers tightened around the broom. She had prepared herself for this, prepared to be calm, to be distant, to protect her heart. But standing this close to him, hearing his voice again, her resolve wavered. "It's okay," she replied. "Sometimes we go places without knowing the reason." He nodded, as if her words made sense in a way he could not explain. His eyes wandered around the small house, pausing on simple things: a chipped cup, a folded blanket, a plant by the window. Each detail stirred something quiet and familiar inside him. "This place feels warm," he murmured, "like I've been here before. Or maybe I wished I had." Tu Diem looked away. Outside, the wind rustled through dry leaves, carrying with it the ordinary sounds of life: children laughing, a motorbike passing by, someone calling out for lunch. Life continued, unaware of the fragile moment unfolding between two people bound by a past only one of them remembered. "You don't have to force yourself to remember," she said softly. "Some things come back on their own." Toan studied her face, searching for answers he did not know how to ask. "Then why," he asked quietly, "do I feel uneasy when I'm far from you, and calm when I'm close?" Toan felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she held them back. Love, she realized, was not always about being recognized. Sometimes it was about waiting, silently, patiently, while the heart finds its way home, even when the mind is lost. And somewhere deep inside Toan, a door trembled, as if something forgotten was beginning to wake. Some memories do not return as pictures or words. They return as feelings, quiet, stubborn feelings that refuse to leave. For Toan, those feelings began to follow him everywhere, like a shadow he could no longer ignore. That evening, rain fell unexpectedly, the kind of rain that arrives without warning, soaking the earth and slowing the world. Toan stood under the small roof of a roadside stall, watching people hurry past with their heads down, each carrying their own worries home. And suddenly, without knowing why, he thought of Tu Diem. He wondered if she had closed her windows in time. The thought startled him. Why should he care? He barely knew her. At least, that was what his memory told him. Yet his heart whispered otherwise. It urged him forward, through the rain, along the familiar road that his feet now seemed to remember better than his mind. When he reached her house, the lights were still on. The door creaked open, and Tu Diem stood there, surprise flickering across her face before she could hide it. "You'll catch a cold," she said instinctively. Her words struck something deep inside him, not the meaning, but the tone. He had heard that voice before, in another time, another life. He stepped inside, water dripping from his jacket, his thoughts tangled like wet thread. "I don't understand what's happening to me," Toan admitted, his voice low. "There are gaps in my head, but not in my chest. When I see you, I feel like I'm losing something all over again." Tu Diem turned away, busying herself with pouring tea, giving herself a moment to breathe. Outside, rain tapped against the roof, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "There are things we don't always get answers to," she said carefully. "Life doesn't explain itself. It only asks us to keep going." He watched her hands move, slow, gentle, familiar. A sudden ache rose in him, sharp and unexpected. Images flashed in fragments: laughter in a kitchen, fingers intertwined, a promise whispered late at night. They vanished as quickly as they came, leaving his head spinning. He pressed his hand to his temple. "I saw something," he said, "or felt it. You were there." Tu Diem froze. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. This was the miracle she had never dared to hope for, and yet it terrified her. If memories returned only to disappear again, could her heart survive it? "Sometimes," she said softly, "the heart remembers before the mind is ready." Toan looked at her then, not as a stranger, but as someone deeply familiar, someone essential. The rain outside softened, turning into a whisper. In that fragile silence, both of them understood something without saying it aloud. Even if memory was broken, love was not. It lingered in glances, in instinct, in the quiet pull that drew two lives together again, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Morning arrived quietly, the kind of morning that feels like a pause between two deep breaths. The rain from the night before had washed the streets clean, leaving behind a soft, fragile light. Tu Diem stood by the window, her hand resting unconsciously on the glass, watching the world wake up. Some days in life begin with certainty. This one began with hope and fear walking hand in hand. Toan had not slept. Memories did not return to him in clear scenes, but in waves, uninvited, relentless. A laugh echoing in his chest, a name he almost remembered, a feeling of belonging that refused to fade. Every time he closed his eyes, Tu Diem's presence appeared, not as an image, but as warmth. And warmth, he realized, was not something the mind could invent so easily. He returned to her house just after sunrise. Tu Diem opened the door, startled to see him standing there again, eyes tired but determined. He looked different, quieter, as if something heavy had settled inside him. "I don't remember everything," he said before she could speak. "But I know this. When I walk away from you, something inside me breaks, and when I come back, it starts to heal." Her breath caught. Life often gives us moments like this, unscripted, imperfect, trembling with truth. Moments where logic fails, and only the heart dares to answer. She invited him in. They sat across each other, the space between them filled with words left unsaid. Outside, a neighbor swept fallen leaves, the simple sound grounding them in the ordinary rhythm of life. It reminded Tu Diem that love does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in quiet persistence. "I waited," she finally said, "not because I was sure you would remember, but because I couldn't forget." Toan closed his eyes. Something inside him clicked. Not a memory, but a decision. He reached for her hand, hesitant, as if afraid the moment might disappear. "Then let me choose you," he said, "even without my past. Let me fall in love with you again, slowly, honestly." Tears slid down Tu Diem's cheeks, but she smiled. In that smile was pain, relief, and a fragile kind of joy. Life, she realized, does not always return what it takes away. Sometimes it offers something different, something deeper. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the room, they sat there together. Not as who they used to be, but as who they were becoming. And in that moment, the invisible thread between them tightened, not bound by memory, but woven by courage, patience, and a love strong enough to remember on its own.